Hi, I'm Obsessing Again, and today we're going to be talking about Spider-Man 2. Insomniac's Spider-Man 2 was able to capture the imaginations of players by creating cinematics that almost leapt off the page from comic books. Narratively, Spider-Man 2 is a focused look about the Spider-Man Brotherhood blossoming, whilst being confronted by their shortcomings, and in this, a consistent theme of I'm sorry. Spider-Man is a character we've been familiar with since 1962, with various incarnations of the boy from Queens, Peter Parker, is an iconic comic book hero. What makes Peter a special superhero is his care for everyone and seeing the good in people, which can also be his Achilles heel. Peter Parker wouldn't be Peter without consistent issues of holding down jobs and having a work-life balance. Spider-Man 2 is no different, only we're experiencing a character who's ready to pass on the vigilante mantle. His relationship with MJ seems to be in a tricky spot. The combativeness of her not being ready to move in makes him unsure where they're going as a couple.
Or maybe that everything's too up in the air to think about it yet?
Yeah, maybe.
As for Miles Morales, he feels like a staplehood character for Marvel, which is surprising given we were only introduced to him around 2011. His strong heritage of having a Puerto Rican mother and an African American father gives him a different background to Peter's. His suits in-game represent his love of music, with Daft Punk-inspired helmets, and your friendly neighbourhood errands inspiring these suit designs. When we meet Miles in the second game, he mirrors the familiar minutiae of a young Spider-Man by balancing his studies, love interests, and being everyone's friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man. But with the duality of the Spider-Men, our favourite Uncle Ben once said,
"With great power comes great responsibility."
And boy, do the Spider-Men feel it. The game's opening of establishing Peter's new job as Mr. Parker and Miles watching it fumble in front of his very eyes while Sandman is causing havoc across New York sets the stakes. Pete is then trying to justify his absence when the school is evacuated in a major incident in the city. Before he's even found his footing, Miles watches from a distance whilst his mentor is fired.
You're fired!
Pete's turmoil is faced with bills and eviction notices, trying to keep the home he was raised in. The death of Aunt May is felt in the sparseness of what was a family home, her belongings scattered about and him feeling the guilt of not being able to keep things afloat. When we see a flashback of a young Peter, Aunt May reminds him,
Balance is a process, not a destination.
This sentiment follows through the game, with Peter spreading himself too thin and never really being able to be content.
Spider-Man, over here!
Hey, Chief.
Thanks for coming.
When we're introduced to Harry, Insomniac was able to write him into the game ingeniously, like he had always been there. Though he's mentioned in the first game, the flashbacks you play out set gallivanting through the school, reminiscing about old times, making it feel like he never left. Pete seems to feel inherent guilt when we find out that Harry wants a foundation set up in honour of both Harry's mum and Pete's aunt. Harry is passionate and deeply committed, but Pete is realising that not only is he spreading himself thin anyway, but this role wouldn't allow for his late night web swinging antics. Miles is crippled with the events of the first game still being very prevalent in his day-to-day life, needing guidance from a father who is no longer around. Pete's own experiences of his loss with Uncle Ben and now Aunt May allow for him to mentor Miles and give guidance. Miles' anger and seeking revenge aren't that of Spider-Man values, to which Pete reiterates. When Miles is rescuing the sinking ship, he is stung by Scorpion. His hallucinogenic state confronts him with the events of his dad's death. You can hear his dad echoing phrases like "give up" as he fights to get out of the sinking ship. On that day, Miles couldn't protect one of the most important people in his life. Though helpless, he takes accountability and he feels sorry for his mum. And like Pete, the Spider-Men are trying to right the wrongs of New York. When Miles is confronted with Lee for the first time since the first game, he is in a trance-like state. He focuses on destroying him and is completely blindsided. In this tug-of-war between Miles, Martin Lee and Craven, he overlooks a civilian slipping to their death. This moment only exclaims that Miles has not gone over the circumstance of his dad's death, but he has put his own needs over citizens in desperate need of help. The symbiote becomes a major turning point for Peter Parker. When Harry has it, we see his physicality is enhanced and the symbiote rush of being on par with Peter makes him confident in himself. What makes this adaptation of the symbiote interesting is how it visually grows from military-styled armour to striated muscles. It becomes a manifestation of Peter's internal struggles and how it's taking over his body rather than protecting it. The alluring attributes of its strength and feel-good factor give Peter a growing sense of addiction. Whilst it is seeping into his body, we see it alter his mood heavily, acting out in aggression, being curt and self-centered. It's a massive contrast from the character at the start of the game. We can always rely on Peter's upbringing to know good from bad, but this changes. His moral compass becomes skewed, and this is heard in his monologues while swinging through New York or conversations with characters.
Been hunting Lee.
I'll find him.
I'm calling the
I
hospital.
said I'd find him. I've got this under control.
The symbiote reveals the harboured darkness or resentment the carrier has towards other characters. As it takes more and more of Peter's personality, we find him belittling Miles and not respecting MJ. He pried on all their deepest insecurities, particularly Miles, who is still having a hard time adjusting to his new powers whilst trying to be a student. The toxicity in the aftermath of a symbiote episode is a reflection of extensive alcohol intake. For example, one morning Peter finds himself on a park bench, unsure how he even got there. An intervention is put in place for Peter to hand the suit over. Pete becomes defensive over him giving something up that he's lost control of. Subsequently, he becomes violent and aggressive, which emphasises his transformation from the Spider-Man we know him to be.
I tried to tell you about that.
Yeah, but you didn't, did you?
I can't lose this job.
Your job is to write the truth.
I did.
The truth is, I'm the hero here, not you.
At the midway point of the game, Miles confronted by Martin Lee in a fight to the death scenario. Miles overpowers Lee, but instead of finishing him off, he sacrifices himself.
When you're out, find Spider-Man.
Later on, Lee and Miles will team up to save Pete by delving deep into his self-conscious state. They find Pete to be by May's bedside, at its most vulnerable. A gestured handshake towards Martin Lee then erodes all of Miles' turmoil and struggle. He was able to forgive Lee and forgive himself. Pete and Miles' bond is strengthened, coming full circle, all ready for the final stage.
So let's set things right. You and me.
After Harry is reunited with the symbiote, he rampages through Oscorp and Times Square, killing Craven. His story of saving the world is warped when Venom takes over. We as the audience are eventually reunited with our familiar Spider-Man in Pete. Unfortunately, he has to reconcile with everyone he let down whilst being under the symbiote. As the symbiote spreads like wildfire in our densely populated New York, we're confronted with Scream in the form of MJ. The fight allows for MJ's Scream to issue her resentment towards Pete, calling on his lack of support and not being around. Pete then had to apologise. In this back and forth and him being thrown around like a ragdoll, it's MJ who yells out wanting validation and being in control. This probably comes from a lack of mobility. She can't freely do what she wants based on Pete's secret identity. You can't keep a job, you can't pay the mortgage. These hard truths seem to be what has ultimately made MJ hesitant to truly commit to Pete on a long-term basis. After this back and forth of claiming he only cares about one job, she is eventually separated from her Scream form. In this, they reconcile that she didn't mean what she said, quitting her Daily Bugle job and finding a level of peace.
I love you.
I love you.
As the antithesis of the final boss fight between Spider-Man and Venom, his strength seems to overpower our two heroes. After Pete has fallen to one side, Miles will fight Venom and go toe-to-toe with arguably Spider-Man's strongest villain. Pete must use his anti-symbiote abilities to end it all and potentially in that moment kill his best friend. Though he did the righteous thing, he feels the guilt of how Norman Osborn berates Spider-Man, with a deeply wounded Harry in his arms. If it wasn't for Miles and his charge abilities, Harry would have died. The guilt and weight of not truly saving Harry won't come to fruition until the next game. This is heavily implied in a post-game credits scene. Spider-Man 2 deals with the ultimate struggles of what it means to be a Spider-Man and live two different lives.
And hey, if you need some help from your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, I'd say we make a hell of a team too.
It exposes that a level of balance is never truly achievable. In addition, it exemplifies that the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is bigger than Peter Parker and Miles Morales. Peter created a figure that embodied the heart and care for the city, and in some way you are in service of the heroic symbol, rather than in service of the city. Peter Parker can identify that if he wants a life for MJ, he'll need to prioritise the ones that are close to him and build the life May would have wanted for him. He has made many sacrifices which would have had detrimental impacts on those close to him. Therefore, this reiterates his apologies to the ones who have been affected. Miles Morales' character arc of forgiveness shifts him from being an up-and-coming to the ultimate Spider-Man. This is shown in his treatment of Martin Lee and using that pain he felt to make a positive impact. The role of duty from his father gave Miles the motivation to be selfless, and with his mother's position in the city and her guidance as a mother, he can share the burden and find a better balance. Both the Spider-Man's openness to being sorry is an acknowledgement of wanting to be better. Thank you for letting me obsess again.